Hey, what's up, Funkaholics? Disney Plus recently came out, and the very first thing I did after signing up was watch The Mandalorian, of course. But the second thing was go and watch every single Simpsons Treehouse of Horror special. I think when you add them all up, it's like over 10 hours, so I had quite the Treehouse of Horror marathon. As I was watching, I was reminded of how much I like the recent Treehouse of Horror Funko Pop line. I think it's one of the best of the year. I think they picked some really good characters already, but there are so many more that they could make that I also think would be very popular. First up, I'd like them to make Bart as the Raven. It's from the very first Treehouse of Horror and is one of the most iconic mashups of The Simpsons and another pre-existing property that we associate with Halloween, like Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Raven. It's not one of my favorite segments, but the image of Bart is super memorable and I think it would translate well into pop form. Another one I would like from one of the very early episodes is Mr. Burns when he's removing Homer's brain and he puts it on his own head and goes, "Look at me, I'm Davy Crockett." I think if they gave the brain like a glossy paint job and Mr. Burns' face more of a flat paint job, I think it would look really good. And posed with his hands up like this would make a great pop. Flanders has appeared as a devil several times, but I think this version, which was the first time, is one of the most iconic versions. With the goat legs, a tail, the red coat, the big collar, the horns. It's just a cool looking devil in general, but it still keeps a lot of Flanders' look. It would just look really good, and he'd have to have kind of like a dynamic pose instead of just hands by the sides. He'd have to kind of be wagging his finger or something. And from the same episode, I'd like them to make Homer with the donut head with a bite taken out. That would look awesome as a pop. Even though I saw the scene where The Simpsons turned inside out decades ago, it really stuck in my mind because it was so disturbing. It was a parody of Stephen King's The Mist, and when they enter the mist, it makes people like turn inside out. So, that's really gross and horrifying. And I really like the way they did it in the show. It's just, I don't know, it's not even that detailed, but it still feels really gross with the sound effects and just the way it looks. And it's funny that Marge's hair is made out of flesh. I think this one would be a fun challenge for the Funko Pop sculptors and designers. And I think they could make all 5 of the family members and they would sell. I would definitely buy all 5 of these, especially if they were in the dancing pose. Krusty as Dracula, totally classic. I think we need a new Krusty. I think the original one doesn't even look that good. And of course, he's insanely expensive, kind of out of reach for most collectors. So a Dracula version of Krusty is definitely on the top of my most wanted Treehouse of Horror Funko Pops. A really fun one to make for Funko Pop collectors would be the comic book guy as the villain, the Collector. He's basically a fat nerd that collects actual celebrities. Like in the segment, he tried to collect Lucy Lawless. It's one of the sillier ones, but they've never made a comic book guy. And him as a collector, maybe even holding that giant tape dispenser would be kind of cool. Another really funny one and just classic Simpsons premise where Lisa tries to do something good and it turns out awful is when she decides to rescue Snorky the dolphin and he turns out to be like a total asshole and the leader of the other dolphins and they march on the humans and take over the planet, beating or killing and just generally destroying the human race. It's kind of ridiculous, but one of the funnier episodes to me. And I think Snorky the dolphin would be cool, especially if he's wearing the sea captain's hat and has his pipe in his mouth after he kills him and he's imitating him. I think that would be a really funny and just original pop. And who wouldn't want Chief Wiggum as like an actual pig? It's from the episode when they parody the island of Dr. Moreau and all the Simpsons characters are half animal. So of course Chief Wiggum is half pig and yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Chief Wiggum as a pig. Another one that's more of an actual set would be The Simpsons as the Fantastic Four. This one might be one of the more far-fetched ones because of the licensing and all that, but who knows? I mean, they've done the Big Bang Theory and a Justice League mashup before, so why not this? The whole licensing thing is really tricky. This is like a fantasy. Like if I could get anything done, I would want Simpsons as Fantastic Four. And of course, Maggie would have to have like an invisible chase. Another very random one, but kind of interesting would be Moe as like an opium den manager. Probably not the most politically correct one, but Mo always cracks me up, and I would definitely buy him as an opium den manager in pop form. From the episode where they parody Fantastic Voyage, I thought it was really funny when they all got in the get-ups and Marge was like, why is mine so skimpy? And Homer was all into it. Really a funny moment, and I think that the costume looks good on Marge, but how funny would it be to have, Marge's super tall hair in pop form, also with a huge dome around it? It would look awesome. I would actually like her body in like an action pose with a stand and everything. I think it would need a stand just because of how heavy the head would be. Just think if they did it right, it would be a really, really cool pop. Similar to Chief Wiggum as a pig, I think this one's pretty much a no-brainer. Maggie as a witch, definitely in an action pose with a nice bright green for the skin, maybe even glow in the dark, would be awesome. In one of the episodes, the kids go trick-or-treating, and I think Nelson as a hobo really stands out. It's got so much detail, but you can still tell it's Nelson. But it would be really cool if they made him holding, the bag of poop that he's going to light on fire and the stick with like that sack that hobos use. And just with all these little details like the flower, the handkerchief, the stripes, the painted on kind of like 5 o'clock shadow, the fingerless gloves, all so much detail that would look amazing as a Funko Pop. And this is another one where I think it's just Marge in like a funny scenario to me. It's her at a home Halloween party and she's like a sexy cat girl and she's drunk. I think it's funny they gave her the choker. I mean, it looks like one of those costumes where a girl kind of didn't think about what she was going to be for Halloween, and the day before she just kind of put together a cat costume. I think that's funny. I think it's funny that she's holding the martini. I think if they made her eyes kind of half shut like that, it would look like she's drunk, and it would be a great pop to add to the collection. Homer as Dr. Manhattan. Who wouldn't want that? It looks hilarious. Dr. Manhattan is a great character. Blue Funko Pops in general look really cool and add a nice splash of color to the collection. I think it would be great if he was glow in the dark, and they did add a little shadow around the eyes, and just make his little underwear and his 5 o'clock shadow not glow, but the rest of his body just a nice blue glow. I think would look just totally amazing. And here is Homer as a very different superhero. In this episode, he gets bitten by a spider and he gets paralyzed, so they put him like on this little trolley to help move him around. And then he gets bit by a spider again, except for this time it's radioactive, so he gets Spider-Man's powers, but he's still paralyzed. So he's swinging around rescuing Marge, but he can't move, so it's ridiculous like how he actually does this. And towards the end, he's shooting spider webs out of his ass to catch the criminals. Maybe the most absurd Treehouse of Horror segments ever, but I think Homer as a paralyzed Spider-Man that shoots webs out of his ass would look hilarious as a pop, especially if it's an action pose and the webs are like holding him up, kind of like they're the stand. It would be hilarious. Now this is one where it could be a whole series of pops. Like they could make 8 pops out of this. It's the one where they make the Simpsons characters as Aztecs. It's super colorful, super detailed. They're all wearing these big headdresses where, Funko Pops, the emphasis is on the head. So I think these big headdresses would look amazing, especially if they do the carvings on the headdresses in like flat paints combined with glossy paints and really sculpt the feathers in the way so they look like they're flowing and a different texture. It would be pretty challenging, but the result would look pretty incredible. I mean, look at Lenny and Carl here, Marge and Homer, Selma and Patty. They all look great, especially Marge and Homer. I think, of course, if I only had to pick one, it would be Marge. I think she has the most detail. I think Mo looks great too. But really, I would want all of these. I think they would all look awesome. I think all together they would be like the centerpiece of a lot of people's collections, just because it would be so eye-catching. One of the ones I want the most from the Treehouse of Horror. One of my favorite parodies they did was the one where they decided to make Homer a yellow version of the Cat in the Hat, except they called him the Fat in the Hat. So he comes over to hang out with the kids, but he immediately proceeds to do just a bunch of really messed up shit. Like, he blows up their house. He takes them to a bar where he starts to get drunk. And then he pulls a razor blade on the bartender and he kills them and skins them and wears his fur and gives Lisa vodka and Bart gin. Then he takes him to town hall, puts on a Guy Fawkes mask, and blows it up. It's definitely one of the darker episodes, but I think the design for the Fat in the Hat was really good, and it would make a great pop, especially if they have him holding like a beer, or even have a chase version with a Guy Fawkes mask, or give him a fifth of gin or whatever. I would buy it in a heartbeat. So just like the Inside Out Simpsons and the Aztec Simpsons, the Clockwork Orange Simpsons would be a great series because I would want them to make all of them. Moe, Lenny, Carl, and Homer. And it's kind of funny that Homer in this one, instead of Dim, his name is just Dumb. Because in the original, one of the guys, his name is Dim. I just thought that was funny. I think when they pose them, it would be cool if they were kind of like walking from the classic scene where Alex DeLarge turns on his droogs after they're a little insolent with him. I think that would be the best version for the sculpt of the Pops. I also really like how Marge looks at the music store, and maybe even a 2-pack or like a movie moment or a cartoon moment with Marge and Homer on the bed and she's actually reading Clockwork Orange and they're on that classic bedspread would be really cool and would be maybe the only movie moment I ever buy. I think a version of Moe strapped into the chair with a device over his head that keeps his eyes open would be interesting to see how they turn that into a pop. And of course, at the very end of this episode, you see Maggie as Alex DeLarge. And that's actually not the first time you see Maggie as Alex DeLarge. And they've also had Bart as Alex DeLarge before, so obviously the Simpsons creators are fans of A Clockwork Orange. Definitely one of the ideas I would like to see the most. From the episode where Homer is Godzilla, it would be a really cool series if we had the comic book guy as a sumo wrestler, and just some of the other Springfield citizens dressed how they would be dressed in like 1950s Japan. And of course, Homer as Godzilla. Especially since they already gave us Homer as King Kong, I think this would be a nice companion piece with that one. There is one segment that I think everybody can agree is the most disturbing and darkest segment ever in any Treehouse of Horror Halloween special. And it's the one where Homer is left home alone. He finishes all the food in the house and he's too lazy to go to the store, so he decides to start eating himself. It starts out that there's one hot dog left in the freezer. He goes out to barbecue it. He thinks it's done. He goes to cut it. He slips because it's still frozen and he cuts his own finger off. Santa's little helper eats the hot dog and his finger lands on the barbecue and starts to cook. And when it's done, he eats it and he finds it delicious. So he proceeds to just eat more of himself and more of himself. This is as disturbing as any David Cronenberg body horror movie you've ever seen. This was legit disturbing. Homer just keeps eating himself and eating himself until Marge catches him cooking his own leg. And she's legitimately horrified and says this is the worst moment of their entire marriage. But Homer can't stop until eventually Mario Batali cooks his head and the whole town eats him. I think if they were to make a pop of this, it would have to be maybe Homer with the bandages around his waist, holding a knife with the mitten on his hand and his other hand having his fingers sliced off. That, or if they somehow make a pop of him where he's cooking his leg, but I guess without the stove. But probably the one with the bandages would be the one that makes the most sense. Although a really clever sculptor could figure out how to make Homer without the leg and still kind of make up on a stool and maybe holding the pan in front of him. That would be a really good one too. And maybe they can have a chase version from the very end of the episode because of course Homer doesn't survive and he's in heaven with Jesus and Jesus is talking to him and Homer decides to start eating his own wing because I guess he still has the habit. That would be kind of a cool pop as well. But yeah, pretty disturbing episode, as it should be. You know, it's a Halloween episode. And lastly, from the segment where it's a parody of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but with plants, and all the citizens of Springfield turn into different plants, I thought it was hilarious that Otto turns into a pot leaf. Funko would probably never do it. I mean, they've done some pretty disturbing stuff, like make Funko Pops out of rapists, pedophiles, dead people. I would think that's all worse than a pot leaf. But yeah, Otto as a pot leaf, as a Funko Pop, would be hilarious. And make him scented. Alright guys, those are the pops I would want from The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. Let me know in the comments below which ones you would like. If you have Disney Plus, and what do you think about it? If you were like me and went and watched all the Treehouse of Horror episodes back to back before watching any of the other Simpsons. or anything else you'd like to say. Thanks for watching and take it easy.